Hello, this is Tash Willcocks. This is the Service Design Show, episode 223.
We talk a lot about design tools and processes, but what about the messy human stuff in between? You know, things like navigating conflict, giving feedback, and figuring out our own quirks. Turns out that's all part of the design process too. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. Our guest today is Tash Willcocks, and her journey in design is all about transformation and self-discovery. She's gone from being someone who avoided conflict at all costs to someone who embraces it as a tool for growth and innovation. Now, as the head of learning design at TPX Impact, she's guiding others on a similar path, helping them uncover their strengths and overcome those nagging doubts that hold us back. Tash's journey took an unexpected turn at Hyper Island, a creative business school. That experience, she says, was like a deep tissue massage for the brain, forcing her to confront her own behaviors and how they impacted others. So with Tash's story as our guide, we're going to delve into some crucial topics like why we might be making work harder on ourselves than it needs to be, how to create a work environment where we can actually thrive instead of just surviving, practical techniques for navigating conflict and giving feedback effectively, the power of self-reflection and continuous learning in the world of design, how to embrace challenges and overcome those pesky inner doubts that hold us back, and finally, why it is so important to surround ourselves with people who challenge us and support our growth. Now, one thing that really struck a chord with me was Tash's take on feedback. It's not about being nice or shying away from those tough conversations, but it's also not about being a jerk. It's about finding that sweet spot between kindness and clarity, where we can give and receive feedback in a way that feels supportive and helps us grow. And honestly, that's something I think we could all use a little more of, both at work and in our personal lives. Now, this conversation takes some unexpected turns, exploring everything from creative conflict to the power of self-reflection. And Tash even shares a few personal stories that are both insightful and a bit surprising. So buckle up and get ready for a thought-provoking conversation. I'm your host, Mark Fontijn, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Tash, you are on a mission to rescue us from Monday morning dread by helping us communicate, collaborate, and even embrace creative conflict. What do you feel are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions people have around these topics?
Number one, I feel intimidated. You made that sound much grander than I had written down.
Exactly. Yes, that was a whole plan.
Awesome. So yeah, that Monday morning dread. I used to get the Monday morning dread. You know, that sort of, it's almost, if you get the beer fears, I don't know if you get the beer fears, where you've had a little bit too much to drink and you get that sort of slight anxiety. I used to get that on Monday mornings, or Sunday evenings. And actually, I just don't think the work world should be like that. We spend a third of our lives in work. And I think in the design and sort of creative industries, we are in sort of quite a privileged place. It's, you know, we're not on the front end of healthcare where, you know, people are dying. We are sort of like working in a space which, you know, we should be running into work and going, great, we're doing this. And I think a lot of that the time, it isn't the work, it isn't the stuff that we're doing, the design, it's the sort of, it's the wraparound that, it's the people that we work with, it's the conflict that we get into, or sometimes the conflict we think we're getting into, or the things that we're like, oh no, I didn't do X, or I don't feel like I'm doing good enough, or imposter syndrome sort of drilling down on us. So yeah, I just think if we could spend a little bit more time as humans and have that wrapped around the work and understand ourselves and understand each other, we might be able to sort of have a little bit of a nicer time at work, and that would be good.
That would be good. Sounds good. We'll explore in this conversation how we can get there. But first of all, I'm really interested. Where is this coming from? Like, what's the story that sparked your interest in this topic?
I've been in education a long time. I've always straddled education and working in industry, and it's been an amazing experience. And I worked at a university. I was a lecturer for a long time. I headed up departments in masters and degrees in sort of everything from illustration, graphic design, etc., etc. And then a organisation called Hyper Island knocked on my door and said, "Hey, every time we try and do something, you're there, your name keeps coming up. Do you want to come and work for us?" And I'd been in the university for quite a long time at that point. I was still sort of like working externally, freelance as well. But I was like, yeah, let's do this. It's time for a change. And basically, going to Hyper Island, working there is a little bit like getting one of those sort of really deep massages, but for your brain and behaviours. And it showed me the mirror a little bit. And I suddenly had to sort of like understand my behaviours, how they affected other people. And it made me reflect on sort of about 20 years of my career where I was like, oh no, I've done some really awful things. And not in a bad way. They were always done in with good intent. It was never done in with bad intent. But I started realizing that organizations are made up of people, and we are a system, and we're all knitted together with these tiny, tiny threads. And we're knitted together in the org design. So that could be quite hierarchical. It could be flat, whatever sort of like whatever org design you're in. So there's the org design, but there's also the organic part of it as well, where we have connections and the people we get on with, and that really, really affects the business. And yeah, I suddenly realized how connected design is to business, and sort of like the two work in unison. And yeah, I think it was just unpacking the mess of humanity embedded in businesses and organizations and systems.
You went into Hyper Island, and I'm curious if you could share, like, there must have been an aha moment or an event that made you reflect on the past 20 years? Or was it like rather a big bowl of spaghetti and multiple experiences?
It was a big bowl of spaghetti with multiple experiences, but I think one thing that really brought it home to me, and it's one thing I noticed in myself, I was really, really conflict averse. Like, I would do anything not to have an argument or a conflict with someone. And it made me a little bit subservient. It made me a little bit of a yes person. And again, that was not good for my team. It was not good for the students. It was not good for the people around me. So it was also not good for me as well, because I think a lot of the time I almost burnt myself out so that it didn't disrupt other people. And actually, we went through Susan Whelan's model of group development. So it's similar to Tuckman's, and this is where I get it in the wrong order. It's norming, storming, performing, adjourning. So you have to go through that conflict. You have to go through that moment of conflict, and it can be quite small, to understand each other as a team. And I sort of suddenly realised I'd actually sort of stood between people, or sort of stopped conflict happening in lots and lots of different spaces, where it actually would have been much healthier for people to have had that hard conversation, to have given that really hard feedback, so that they could get through it and get to the next stage and actually be a healthier team. And also like put better design things out in the world.
Mm.
Have those really gnarly, hard, gritty conversations that make you prickle at the time and sometimes sort of go, I don't want to do this. But actually you pop out the other end going, oh, that was amazing. I'm in a better it's like I always say it's like squeezing a spot. You're just going to get a really awful spot that gets bigger and bigger. It's the stinky fish as well. It's that thing that suffers inside you and just gets stinkier and stinkier.
So you already mentioned creative conflict, and I'm curious if you have some examples of that. At the same time, um, what did you, what changed, or what did you experience that made you embrace like this conflict stage? How did you change? Because it's hard.
It is hard. I think um, I've got a lot of drawings, so I've got a drawing in my head, which is this drawing that I did that was this really big red saw sort of like mess, tangly mess. It was like a grumpy face on it. And I think what it was, there was lots of times where I was just carrying that feeling because I wasn't running towards the conflict. I wasn't running towards that piece of feedback that I needed to deliver or that conversation that I had to have or sort of that piece of work where I was like, right, this isn't good enough. We need to go back to this and do it. So I was just carrying that with me, and also probably inflicting that on the team around me as well. And then I am not going to say much details about this because it's private towards me and this person. Something happened, and I said something that I shouldn't have done. And I own that. I completely own that I said something that I shouldn't have done. But actually, it should have been said to that person's face. And somebody went and told the person, and they were quite high above me in the organisation. And they made a bit of an offhand, I heard you said this, and then left the room. And I went, oh, I feel sick. I'm going to get the sack. And actually, I went, no, I should have said that to their face. I'm going to apologise, but I am going to say it to their face, and we're going to have that conversation. And I genuinely, and when I say run towards the conflict, I ran after them and went, can we go for a walk? Can we just go for a walk? Because I, A, don't want this to hang between us. I really respected that person. I don't want this to hang between us. But the truth is, that is how I feel. And I think we need to have this conversation. And it was really nice. We went outside, and I intentionally took them down to the canal. So we were in a really neutral, open space, fresh air, a few geese around, and we had a really, really hard conversation. But afterwards, I felt like I'd taken this huge weight off the shoulders. And actually, I think it made our relationship so much stronger because of that honesty and that the way we both reacted to that conflict as well. We were like, okay, good conversation, felt it. I won't sing Frozen, I might, and then let it go.
Thank you for sharing this. It always helps to have these examples. Now, you do a lot of teaching and you encounter a lot of students. How do you bring this experience into the teaching that you do?
I would say I don't teach as much anymore. I used to be a teacher. I'd say I now, because I work with adults, I facilitate their learning. Um, I know that sounds, I'm just being pernickety, but we'll get into conflict now. We'll be like, but it's like releasing that knowledge that's already in there a lot of the time. Um, yeah, I tell a lot of stories, but also it's about creating. It's a buzzword. I know it's a buzzword, but how can I create a psychological safe space as quickly as possible? Because sometimes I'm only with people for half a day or a day. Sometimes I'm with them for a year. Fantastic. And we have time to build that up. But how do I create those spaces where they feel comfortable to share their experiences, that people sort of pop those little bits of wisdom? And I think a lot of the time it's because I go first, and I'm pretty honest, I will rip the plaster off quite quickly and go, this happened, it hurt, I failed, that I am not good, and sort of but this is what I learned. And I think there's that. I used to sort of like work with startups quite a lot. That fail fast, fail faster mentality. I know it's not as catchy, but if it said fail, What did you learn? Reflect. Fail again. What did you learn? Reflect. Fail again. It's okay to keep failing, but we do need to learn. And I think it's sort of that. So yeah, offer you first. I sort of, why would anybody else share their experience if we don't put it out there? But then, and you might, because I talk a lot, you've probably noticed that, then I need to shut up and leave that space for their voice.
Yeah, so you're trying to lead by example.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm curious about is something I've heard other people comment on as a little bit of a critique towards design is that we sometimes ask questions that might open, let's call them wounds, without having the experience to actually resolve them. So how do you see that? Because I can imagine that modeling creative conflict and encouraging people to embrace conflict can also sometimes lead to situations. Sometimes you come out better at the other end, but other times, like, you run the risk that people, I don't know, bad things can happen. How do you see that?
Yeah, and I think again that was a learning curve at Hyper Island, because sometimes people felt it was a little bit like therapy, and I had to go, no,
Uh-huh.
it's not therapy. I'm not, like, I am not a therapist. I cannot sort of help you in that way. So I think it's really important. There's it's sort of like putting those boundaries on and sort of understanding the edges. And I think making those edges are really clear. Boxers don't go into a boxing ring and have a fight where potentially they could get really hurt without understanding those rules, and there's sort of like a stop moment and things like that. So I think I'm not a big one. I don't love rules, but I think having edges and sort of understanding those edges are really important. I think understanding we have private lives, and our private lives are for us. That's ours to own. We have personal lives and we have professional lives. The stuff that you need to unpack is the personal that affects the professional. So those two are the things that interact together. So it's okay to bring those in, but be aware what you're opening up, what could trigger other people. Um, but I also think if you're having these conversations, it is personal. You can't say it's not personal. When somebody's sort of in conflict with you or giving you feedback, it feels personal, but keep it about the work, keep it about the business or sort of what you're doing. It's not about pointing fingers. Go in with curiosity, go in with kindness. It's not about being nice, it's being kind and clear. So these, it's sort of, it's it's kind of trying to get people to be aware of their behavior, owning their behavior, stopping and pausing. Before, I know I just said I ran towards conflict. I did have 2 minutes to think about it, but sort of, yeah, pause before you go into these things, and then pause afterwards. How do I feel? Like that real reflection moment. How do I feel before giving a spiky answer back? Stop, pause. I think design, like the creative worlds, we're so, everything's so fast. We have to do everything, today, yesterday. But actually, when it's interacting with other humans, I sounded like a robot then. When you interact with other humans, when you interact with other people, take a pause, take a breath. How is this going to trigger that other person? How is this going to affect that other person? And then I'm a massive fan of radical candor, like feedback, or do it because you care about your relationship. Don't do it weaponized, don't do it sort of in a way to win. Go in with curiosity and care.
For the people who aren't familiar with radical candor, can you give us a quick update?
Yeah, radical candor is I've forgotten her first name.
Yeah, the book.
Scott,
Yeah.
something Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's a way of feeding back. I think it gets misinterpreted a lot of the time because radical candor sounds like you go in and you just give feedback, but it's not. It's very much it's a quad like that, and it's about being in this top right hand corner where oh, my brain is blanked now. It's about the care, but there's another bit. I'm going to come back to that. My brain's blanked on
We'll,
the
we'll, look,
quad.
we'll look it up. I know the 2x2. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll make sure to link it in the show notes. Let's see if we can quickly pull it up.
That's when I say I'm a massive fan of it and then completely forget what it is. It's about growth. Yeah, so there's one bit that's ignorance, so that's ruinous empathy. I used to be in that quadrant, the ruinous empathy where you don't feedback because you want to be nice to people, and actually you end up just sort of making situations worse because you don't actually go and sort of have that conversation. There's mistrust, which is in the bottom left, and that's manipulative insincerity, which I suspect most people have met a few people like that. And then there's defensiveness and obnoxious aggression. So, like, that's that you kind of fight back, but where you want to be is in the top right. And that's that growth and sort of like working together, going in the right direction because you care about relationships, because you care about the work in front of you.
What have you found to be the most hardest to actually put this into practice?
I think people just don't like having difficult conversations. I don't. I'm going to be honest. I talk about this all the time, but I think people don't like having difficult conversations. And by not having the difficult conversations, we end up like elongating that pain. There's a really good quote about it. I've got it written somewhere. There it is. Peter Bromberg, he works in transforming libraries. He says when we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. The reason I've got it written down is I used it in a blog post the other day, but I really like that. It's that we almost are more comfortable with being uncomfortable for a long time rather than that sort of like have the conversation.
And how do we get over it?
It's role modeling. I think leaders have to role model it. I think leaders have to sort of talk about where they've made mistakes, where also celebrate the good stuff as well. Like, where have I made a mistake? Where have I learned? Having the difficult conversations, but doing it in safe ways. Like I said, because you care, and making it feel like people can step into those spaces. But also, it's like, how do you make those spaces? We did this really interesting thing where we called it Fail Club for a little while, where you had to get up on this little stage and go, this is what I failed at. And we failed at Fail Club. It didn't last for very long, but I did love the notion. So, like, how do you create those spaces? How do you create the conversation about having difficult conversations? How do you arm people to have that conversation as well? Because actually sometimes people just don't know how to approach it. So it's almost like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but like, have training on having conversations and having that, getting past that difficult moment, but also open up those doors. I think there's I'm forgetting everyone's first names. David Marquez. He's Turned the Ship Around, which is a fantastic book. He's a submarine captain. There's a brilliant animation, if you sort of prefer watching stuff, where he's got the ladder of leadership, and it's really easy to go, come and give me feedback. Come and sort of have that conversation. If you're a leader, like, yeah, great. But actually, for that person who might be a little less mature in their career, might be a little bit more nervous, come from different backgrounds, that's really hard. So how do you create those spaces? And so if sometimes it's going, please give me feedback, like, I ask for it, but also maybe go to them and go, I'd love to give you some feedback. And it can be positive, not all feedback's bad, but sort of create those spaces. You go first, and then the hope is they start coming to you as well. But it isn't easy, but it's helping those spaces thrive, really.
It's when you say it isn't easy, does it get easier?
I think I'm going to sort of talk about feedback, because I think feedback is sort of a lot of the time that difficult conversation. I think feedback is a muscle. I've got a blog post where I've got a set of cards all about feedback. I think I used to hate feedback. I would run away from you and go, no, don't give me feedback. I don't give you feedback. But actually, I realised I was not getting watered. I was a little plant that was not growing because I was not getting the right feedback. I was misunderstanding stuff. So start small. small and often, because I hate that once yearly feedback mechanism. It's like, oh yeah, great, save it all up for over there. By that point, it's probably grown into a mountain, or it's just not timely. I've been doing that thing for sort of a whole year, so make it timely. Like if something happens, find out how that person likes having feedback. Do they like it in the moment? Do they like to sit down in a call? Try not to do it via Slack, etc. It gets muddled by that.
Mm.
Have a sort of like conversation in person is even better. So if it's a tough one, have it in person, but make it timely, sort of as soon as possible, because then you've got that concrete example. So when you did this, it made me feel, or it, this happened. Really lovely and concrete. Um, and then yeah, often, little and often, and then it doesn't feel hard anymore because it's these
Mm.
little and often sort of nudges of feedback or nudges of sort of not, it doesn't even need to be conflict. It's these little moments
Mm.
where you have tiny conflict or tiny sort of bits of improvement, and it doesn't hurt as much. But when you save it up all into one big bundle, and you're probably angry by that point because you've been saving this feedback up and you've got really frustrated and they've kept doing it because you haven't told them that they shouldn't sort of like be doing that, or could they do it in a different way? Yeah, it becomes this really big burning thing rather than these lovely little flames that can either be amplified or sort of maybe sort of snuffed out a little bit.
What's interesting about this, and you don't know, but the previous episode that we published was with Ryan Scott about the gap between business and design, and then how do you actually get better at design, and you need to break it down into tangible skills like negotiation, sales, math, stuff like that. And this also feels like it fits into that list, like knowing how to give and receive feedback sounds like a skill any professional could use, and maybe design professionals in general. It's curious that we don't really put a lot of effort and emphasis on it, right?
You've said receiving feedback as well there, which is super interesting because the way you receive feedback is as important as the way you give feedback. There's the feedback ladder, and part of that is you reject it. You're like, no, I didn't do that. And actually, it's just like, no, just listen to what the person's saying. And again, it's that pause. Go away and reflect. If you still are like, no, it doesn't sit right, have that conversation. But there's always a nugget of truth, even if it's worst feedback you've had and you're like, I don't agree with any of it. There's always a nugget of truth in there, especially if a few people have said it. And go and ask for feedback of other people as well, like what's been said. And then and I used to be quite bad. So when you get positive feedback, there's that, oh, no, it's just my job, it's this, that. And actually, somebody's put thought and care, and they've come to you in a really brave way and gone, I'd love to give you this feedback. And by going, no, you're just batting it back at them. And if you think about it, it's just like, no, say thank you and accept it and take it. Because the feedback is a present. Sometimes it's a present you don't want to get. But that's like somebody's given you something because they care and you've just thrown it back in their face.
Mm.
And it's a nice thing they've given you. So yeah, it's getting to the top of the ladder where it's like, I listen, I digest, and then it's very much like I take it on and it's something I need to sort of maybe, work on. Or it's something I amplify. If it's something really brilliant, I can amplify it. But also, sometimes it's something where you go, do you know what? I've listened. I think that's really interesting, but I'm just going to park it there because actually it doesn't sit right. But I am going to go and ask a few other people. So actually, sort of, get more data on that.
Nice. Yeah. And practicing, like you said, having these conversations, role playing. Um, it's not something, again, that I see a lot of design schools, service design programs teach. If I look at the stuff that is in design, service design books, you don't read about this, right? Even though this is like you said, this is the stuff around design that actually makes design work or doesn't.
Yeah. And that's that. Lou Downs says it. They've got a quote. It was on Twitter ages ago that 90%, no, 10% of design is design. 90% is basically, it's not quite this, but creating the conditions for it to happen. And I think I got some really, I'm going to blow my own trumpet here. I got some really wonderful feedback after a talk. So I talk about the RE window. So I was in Dublin and I was talking about service design. I do a talk called Services Design Don't Solve Problems, People Do. And it's, if you probably won't know it, it's a Goldie Looking Chains album song. It's a Welsh band. I will make them famous. So in that, I go through the Yahari window, and I talk about Chip Heath, and I talk about the Jonathan Haidt's elephant. So if you've not heard about that, inside each person, there's elephant and a rider, and the elephant's the sort of emotional being, and it's sort of like is the stronger one, and the person is sort of the thinker. Anyway, I was talking about that, and a little bit of feedback that somebody gave me at the end was like, I've never been to a design talk where you didn't talk about design. You didn't, and they were like, you talked about Daniel Goleman, you talked about loads and loads of different behavior stuff, and they were like, I've just suddenly realized I need to read less design books. So I think it's that I love design books, love them, but stop reading just design books. There's a whole world out there of really interesting stuff that will help you navigate this space.
Don't stop listening to the service design show.
No, the service design show always
This
works.
is like this is the ultimate resource, and I think it's true, and I couldn't agree more. Maybe the mindset that we need to get over is that anything that doesn't have design in its title isn't design. So, um, giving and receiving feedback, like we can treat that as a separate entity, but I think we're at a point where we should say this falls within the circle of design. And the same goes for negotiation and sales. As long as we keep treating it as sort of a separate entity, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
It is, for me, it is design. We talk about users and understanding users, but sort of shine that light to your colleagues, your clients, your stakeholders. Like, they are your users as well, as such, or sort of like, if you call it human centered design, they're your humans. How do you understand them? And that's not strictly design. That is your sort of
Yeah.
spheres of influence, your sort of your Hari windows, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, that's before we get too deep into semantics, not strictly design. I think we need to broaden our definition of design. It it is already broader. We just need to bring in those concepts that already have made it into design, right? We need to do ourselves a better service of including these things and making sure that our language is also inclusive around those things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's another failing. Yeah, I am gonna say it's a slight failing, and I put myself in this category as well. That we have our own secret language, and I think there's two camps. There's some people that I feel use it to be exclusive, to go, no, I'm really clever and this makes me look smart, so I'm doing all of this, and not realizing that actually the person that you're communicating to is just going, well, I'm not listening anymore, because you're not using simple plain language with them and onboarding them and bringing them into the project with you, which is what your job is. I think other people do it a little bit because we noodle and talk to each other so much. We're so in this design bubble that we forget that not everybody knows what a blueprint is. Not everybody knows these words.
I have to. We're sort of. I don't know. We're meandering a little bit here, but I have to think back about the episode, and now I am blanking on the name, but with regards to design materials, around a book that recently came out on design materials. And if you look at the book and the design materials that they describe for service design, it is data, it is processes, it is organizations, it is strategy. And I think that's a much more constructive way to start approaching design, where interpersonal relationships or relationships in general are design material. And if you want to be a good service design professional, like that's the material that you need to study. All right.
Like, I think um, I designed a book. I didn't design. I did the illustrations for a book recently with Scott, but us and names. I'm going to blame it on our coughs. Scott Birkin is his name. He wrote Why Design is Hard, and it's great because I got to read the book and then sort of do some nice illustrations with him. But I really like he said the other day, like, design and talent is a distraction, and like a mediocre designer who can influence decisions has more positive impact than a genius designer who's quite often ignored. And I think it's that. It's like you could know all the tools in the world, you could know design inside out, but if you can't get it out into the world, into the organization, if you can't get people advocating for you, if you can't get into those spaces where it needs to be heard, you're basically a starving artist in a garret, sort of like doing lovely design. I'm not saying that, but it's not where it needs to be, and it won't ever make the impact that it needs to.
So going back to our Monday morning dread, like what can we take away from our conversation so far? We are service design professionals listening to this. What do we do differently tomorrow? Or what do we prototype? What do we try?
So what's that smallest um right, do the assumptions, like almost design yourself, like how, if because some people aren't having that Monday dread. I don't have that Monday dread. I'm an annoying person. I look forward to going to work. I love my team. I have amazing clients. It's not all perfect and dreamy. I don't live in a Disney cartoon, but I think the way I got over it was sort of just going, okay, what is causing that? What's that thing that's making me prickle? And I still get it occasionally. And instead of just going, oh, I just won't think about it, or I won't, I'll just deal with that tomorrow. What can you deal with? And what could you deal with on Friday that you can park and make sure that you can leave your work behind and have a wonderful weekend and sort of go, yeah, that can wait till Monday. What are the conversations that you need to have before Friday so you can let it go? Um, yeah, just what are the small incremental things that you can do to just chip away at it and make that sort of change in the space so that you feel on a Sunday it's all right going to work tomorrow, lovely.
I'm curious. I'm sure that there are dozens of things that we can do. Have there been any uh, significant activities for you that made a huge difference? So what did you do?
Yeah, I think I love models. Again, I draw a lot, um, and I like drawing models. So I draw to think, I draw to reflect. So probably in fact, you asked me earlier what was the biggest sort of moment. I started doing one drawing a day, I think about 14 years ago. So I do one drawing a day, post it on LinkedIn. That's made a massive change to my life because I think out loud. I learn out loud. I think out loud. So sometimes, like, if something's troubling me, I will draw it, think it through, park it. But also, it enables me to sort of like draw models and draw it through, understand it, make it as simple as possible for myself, and then put it out in the world if anybody wants to see it. And there's something called the drama triangle. Have you heard of drama triangle?
I think my daughter has, but I haven't yet.
The drama triangle is, at the top you've got victim, then you've got villain, then you've got hero. Okay, so these are sort of like where you can be. And
Mm.
what it helped me was, basically I realized that sometimes I was like, oh, I'll be the hero, I'll go in and help that person, and I was like, I am the savior in this situation. um A, not good for the person, but B, it made me, after a little bit of time where they started relying on me, either go into the villain, where I was just like, oh, why are they doing this to me? It's your fault. Why are you being a bad person? Or go into the victim, where it's like, poor me, everybody relies on me. And this goes back to that Monday thing. I had to stop going, I have to do everything. I will not delegate. I am the hero of this story, or the victim where I'm like, boo hoo hoo, I have to do everything. And that's yeah, it's blame. It's sort of like it's just all about that drama. And actually snapping myself out of that into there's something called the empowerment triangle. I love a triangle. And instead of being that victim, you have to be the creator. So you take it sort of like, how can I learn from this? How can I take responsibility? So instead of me going, I will save you, it's like, how do you go to that person? What can you do? Or what can I do as an individual? And then the villain becomes the challenger. So that's like, how can I constructively help you strive or thrive and stretch? But equally, again, how can I do that? And then there's the facilitator. And obviously, I love facilitation. It's sort of the space I like being in. That is it's sort of going, okay, how can I support and encourage you? So it's almost like flipping the narrative, and that really helped me. But it helped again, it's that behavior with other people. So if when I notice I'm stepping into that, I will save the day, or I will take on all of this work because I'm the hero, I step back and go, actually, no, I don't need to do that. That's damaging for the people around me. It's damaging for me. It's not giving people opportunities as well, because I'll swallow up all the work and get, then I get all the credit. But actually, it's like, no, you know, create those opportunities, create those moments to thrive. I feel like I didn't answer the question then.
Yeah, well, I think to some extent, and this is, I feel like a good example of putting self-reflection and self-awareness into practice, because like that kind of advice can be really hard. Like you need to know yourself. Like, oh, okay, sure, but what do I do? And then finding a model um, that can help you reflect and sort of position. Like any model, no model will be perfect, but
Yeah.
a model can be useful. And this is, I think, a pretty good example of a model that was useful for you in creating that self-awareness, right?
Yeah. It goes back to what I said earlier. I quite like being shown the mirror. And sort of what I mean by that is seeing myself reflected, but the reality of it. And I think that drama triangle really sort of hit it in, because I was like, oh, I have got some bad habits that I've developed. And yeah, I was swinging violently between victim, hero, and sort of, yeah, those different spaces.
I'm curious, did you go into this journey alone, or did you have a mentor or a coach or a guide? Because these, like somebody, I can imagine it helps if somebody asks these questions and puts the mirror in front of you.
It's odd because I am a huge, huge sort of advocate for having a mentor and having these people around. Yet I have never had one myself, but I think I yeah, I have the privilege of being surrounded by a lot of really great people, and I think probably I've got lots of mentors who I chat to and sort of really respect their opinions. So, I worked with Sarah Drummond. I think she's awesome. Sarah is never afraid to sort of like go, have you thought about that? Andy Plain, I've started talking to quite a lot, and again, he asks hard questions, and I love it. And I think there's that ruthless curiosity in these sort of like relationships and with my friends. I think it's creating those spaces where you go, ask me the hard questions, or sort of like, if something's happening, say. But I also think it is the weird drawing. The drawing a day forces me to go and find lots of different, because I have to draw something each day. So that's made me really, really read and go out and find these things that I can digest and sort of think about. So funny enough, I think that has made me find lots and lots of these things. And while I'm drawing it, I'm usually going, oh, wait a minute, I can see myself in this. And either sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes a bad thing.
So how do you, it almost sounds like sort of a journaling practice, and a journaling
Yeah.
practice often, like you can just start writing.
Yeah.
That's one technique. Other techniques encourage you to have a prompt. How do you approach your drawing journaling?
I would love to say there's some sort of thought behind it. I actually think it's usually where it started. It used to be called Mundane a Day, and the whole idea was it was just something mundane. So the actual original drawings were like, I got 2 for 1 olive oil and things like that, or what I had for tea. But over time, it sort of turned into sort of stuff that I'd learned that day. And I think because of my role, I am constantly learning new things and meeting new people. And I get to, like, yesterday, I was in Wales with senior leaders in civil service, and sort of, there is always something that pops out of those conversations that I'm like, that's amazing. I think we ended up with an article list that was about 20 sort of articles long. So it's that I get to be in rooms with really knowledgeable people who share loads. So it yeah, it kind of comes from there. Usually there's something that pops up in the day that I grab and go, that's amazing. Or I read a lot. I'm an awful reader. I think people think I read more than I do. I'm a bit of a grazer. I'm usually reading about 6 books at the same time. And I sort of graze all of them. I read factual books. So it comes from books, comes from conversations. I'd like to think I'm like ruthlessly curious, and that's it, just pops up in that way.
Interesting word, ruthlessly curious, a tongue twister. What do you mean with that?
I think curiosity, that's a design thing. I think designers all need to be curious. They need to be curious about the people they work with, about the job at hand, about not just, it goes back to that, just don't just read design books. What are the things that spark joy in you? And just follow that. Allow yourself to follow those odd little things that sort of spark joy in you. And that's that curiosity. But ruthlessly curious. It's just like really going after it. Something will interest me, and then I will just read and read or ask questions, and really I love a deep dive, and that's what I mean by that ruthless curiosity. Is sort of like, I don't let something stop me. If I'm really interested, I pull that thread. With people, I would say I need to go a bit gentler, and sort of you need to think about the questions, and that's what you were saying earlier. Like sometimes we ask the hard questions, but it's like, how would you ask those hard questions?
We won't go into it, but I'm curious how many side hustles or hobbies you actually have. That, yeah,
Quite a few.
that's the issue with being curious. Everything looks like a puzzle, at least from my personal experience. So Tash, if we start sort of trying to distill a key message from here, if you had the ability to whisper a piece of advice into the ears of every service design professional out there who are maybe struggling to find a healthy team balance, wanting to collaborate, communicate better, what would you whisper in their ears?
I would say go and read about the Yahari window. Joe and Harry, Yahari window. Look that up.
All right. Is there anything else you feel we should have discussed that we haven't done so far?
Should have discussed how creepy that whisper was. So no. Am I allowed to say another quote? I've got another quote in my head.
Please do.
I draw a lot of quotes, so that's the other thing that I draw. I think it's Benjamin Franklin says there's nothing harder in life than diamonds, steel, and understanding yourself. And I think that's the other. If I had another creepy whisper, I'd whisper that. Actually, there is one more. And oh, now I'm going to forget it. There's a really wonderful quote that I use a lot. So it's Maya Angelou, and I do think this actually, if we could just wipe those other two, I think if I was going to whisper something, there's this Maya Angelou quote. She said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that is something to hold in your heart.
Classic quote. So I'm going to give you one more opportunity before we close off. I feel this podcast is as much about finding answers as it is about finding better questions. And the latter is, I think, the more interesting aspect. So if you could give us a question to think about after this conversation, what would it be?
What's the question you wish somebody had asked you?
Awesome question. Uh,
And
that's a great
why? I'm
question.
just going to add "and why" on the end of it.
That's the design element and why. We always want to know why. Tash, if people want to know more about you and your work, what's the best place to go to?
So on Instagram, I do my drawing a day. So if you want to pop there, it's just Tash Willcocks. LinkedIn, I pop quite a lot out into the world on LinkedIn. So if you want to say hello there, I'm always happy to say hello. And then I am tash.willcocks at tpximpact.com if you want to drop me an email. And yeah, if you want to talk about learning, always happy to speak about learning. So yeah, give me a shout on any of those platforms.
I'll make sure to add all the relevant links and make sure your name is spelled correctly in the
Thank
in
you.
the show notes. Tash, this was super interesting. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for helping us make Mondays even better and sharing your wisdom.
Awesome. Thank you for letting me Google quotes that I kept forgetting. I've got a head like that today. Have a wonderful day.
Now, I have to admit, I was a bit surprised by how much I enjoyed hearing about creative conflict and the importance of embracing challenges. It's not always easy to confront those uncomfortable situations, but Tash reminded me that it's often in those moments that we learn and grow the most. And that got me thinking about how we approach challenges in the design world. Do we shy away from them, or do we lean into them and see them as opportunities for innovation and improvement? I think it's a question worth pondering. I also appreciated Tash's honesty about her own journey and the mistakes she made along the way. It's a reminder that we're all humans and that it's okay to stumble as long as we learn from our experiences. So to Tash, thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and share your insights with us. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I hope this conversation has inspired you to embrace challenges, seek out feedback, and never stop learning. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Please click the like button, and if you can, leave a short comment on this video if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the YouTube algorithm, but to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.